Podcasting from Portland East to Portland West, from Big Pine Key to Pacific Beach, and from San Juan to Guam, this is All Across America. Even though you're the 14th editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, we all have more to learn.
We all have more to learn.
Yeah. So since 1792, the oldest continuous publication in North America. When you take the job, is it like becoming a Supreme Court justice where they're like, you have to have this job for life?
You definitely are looked upon as they want you to stay a while.
Right.
And I took it with the same ambition,
Okay.
or I would not say ambition, but the same hope. Somebody did the math for me and said our Robert B. Thomas, our founder, was editor for about 50 years.
Yes, he was. So
if you do the math, the average is about 16 or 17 years of an editorship.
Right.
I may not make it quite that long.
Okay.
But I'd say I've got a dozen years that I'd like to be here. So I think, with writing and with editorial work, honestly, you just get stronger the older you get. It's one of those jobs.
That's true. Yeah.
The more experiences you
You've
build.
seen it over and over again. Wow. And my wife was like, he was 50 years, like, when did he start?
In his 20s, yeah.
In his 20s, okay.
And so he lived a good, ripe time for that age.
And clearly he was doing something right and eating right.
Exactly.
I mean, what is the story behind that?
He was a farmer.
Yeah.
But also he was really, I think it's about a lifelong learning, right? And that's really true as the editor of this publication and for him too, starting out. But yes, I mean, if you read us, we're always organic from the beginning and, this idea of growing your own food and doing it smartly. But also, he was an astronomer. That's where we get our weather forecasts.
Yeah.
And he was, always learning new things. I mean, it's funny, people will say to us, oh, you're doing something about technology and farming. And I'm like, yeah, because we've always been talking about innovation since 1792.
Right.
Everybody who read the Almanac wanted to know, what's that latest technique for, getting hay out of the fields or rocks out of the fields.
Right.
And so obviously we've always done innovation because farmers are always looking for tried and true and what's new.
Right. Right. I mean, you talk to farmers, some of them driving $500,000 combines. So to suggest that technology.
Totally. And now you've got some robots who can spot weeds versus plants you want and can do like super cool, insecticides or herbicides that are just so targeted so they can use less. And there's lots of exciting things that way.
I mean, they don't call it agribusiness for nothing. So
exactly.
But I mean, who would you say are the clientele of the Old Farmer's Almanac readers? Are they more commercial based, or do you have more home gardeners, or I guess maybe even wannabe urbanites, or does it run the gamut?
It really runs the gamut. We've started to do some surveys this year, some new ones. And I've only seen the preliminary results, but we really span ages. We really span income levels from very fixed low income levels to multi-income levels.
Right.
I don't know how to say that. And I've met people from all of those walks of life. I would say that most people that get the Almanac, we know that they have a garden, and it's not a huge garden, but it's a decent one, and people that they might have patio pots too, a small space garden, but most of our readers have a sizable vegetable garden. They're very interested in growing their own food and putting it up too, preserving it.
Yeah.
So that's a strong thing we see there. And we're all over North America. We have a Canadian edition as well.
Yeah, so I didn't realize that.
But I often talk to farmers and farming communities, and I think some of the pieces of the Almanac, like Planting by the Moon, is such an old tradition among, multi-generational farming that some people just really are in it for that, They want that information at their fingertips. Yet we have things that are also like, a reader who's in fourth grade might really like some of our stories too.
Yeah.
So, we try to really span what would a family want to, what could be in the family household for a year and be useful and interesting.
Right. And in terms of the Almanac, you were talking about when you took upon the position, and we talked a little about the weather and the weather predictions, of course, you're famous for, and the moons. There's a black box of that I understand the formula is in?
Well, that was the case.
Okay.
But Mark, we have stepped out of the closet on this one.
I see. Okay.
We are above board. So it was a formula. In fact, I'll take you down the hallway before you go, and you can see an early infographic.
Yeah.
I was in libraries for a long time before I came back to this company. And so I love data. And so did Robert B. Thomas. Yeah. And at the time, as I mentioned, he was an astronomer. So he was fascinated about the magnetic storm cycles of the sun. And then he really believed that those impacted our weather here and that he could make long-range predictions based on those. Mm-hmm. And that's the formula. I mean, I'm not going to give you the formula.
Right, but those are the variables.
Those are the meteorology and climatology.
Okay.
But really basing the long-term on those patterns of data, it's very much a bell curve over and over again that we see during those 11 to 12 year sun storm cycles. And so now you've got torrent cycle, we're about the peak of 25, about to go into 26. So that's a ton of data that has been kept that whole time that we can crunch. And of course,
so it's almost gotten easier in some respects.
It's a lot easier
because you've got all that data that you could draw from that's essentially proprietary.
Yeah, we're looking for patterns.
Yeah.
You know, in a ninth year of a storm cycle with a weak El Nino, you know, what happened then.
I see. Okay.
And I'll show you that it's just really, of course, it was like by hand, these infographics. And now we're no longer in that business, but we are using the same exact weight of that data with each other to make those predictions.
Yeah, I mean, and you think about it, 2.25 centuries later, since 1792. I mean, the solar flaring is a serious issue with our electronics, and so it has only become even more of a concern modern times. And it just seems like he was so far ahead of his time.
Totally.
Back then, how would he even have known about solar flaring, that it was even in existence?
That he had his telescope.
I see. Okay.
So he was he was an amateur astronomer, but he lived outside of Boston.
Okay.
So there was a great intellectual community there in observatories.
Right.
I don't know what his local one was.
Okay.
But that was his passion, and so he was looking at them all the time and helping assemble those first, earlier sets of data by observation. You know, so it's pretty cool.
So when you took on the job and you were shown the formula, was it like this kind of form of omerta where was there a ceremony? Was there some smoke, some white clouds of smoke, or any blood that was needed to be drawn? How does that work?
None of that happened, thank goodness. We have our own team of weather prognosticators at AccuWeather.
Yes.
And so they use our formula.
I see.
So they are really the ones that have the suitcase handcuffed to them.
I see. Okay. It was almost like, what was the thing with Coca-Cola that only 2 executives knew the formula and they weren't allowed to fly on the same plane? I don't know how true that is, but
I think for us, nobody really wants to be a long-range weather predictor.
Okay.
I mean, there's a couple other almanacs that do it. It's just nonsensical since,
it's kind
even
of a hot
short-range weather forecasters is difficult.
Come for your head, you're right.
Yeah.
And so the moon has so much to do with it as well. I mean, it's so much to do with gardening. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And that's one of the things that I've learned even more about since I've been here and really dug into that subject. There's a great book by Rebecca Boyle. She's called Our Moon, and it's all kind of newer research about the moon, how it impacts animals and plants. We already knew all that.
Yeah.
So, farmers back in the old days, and when the Almanac came out, every other person's likely a farmer or a grower of some sort. Right. They don't have a lot of the things. Certainly the hoe hasn't changed much, and those things.
No.
But they knew about the moon, and they knew about those cycles, and they knew how they impacted things. And in short, what that is saying, well, we know a moon impacts our tides, the water, right? And we know that at a full moon and a new moon, the tides are higher than they normally are, and we know some of these things. So what we know is that there's water in the dirt. We can't see, but there's tons of moisture in plants.
Okay.
and in the dirt. And
and our plants are like 80% water, something like that.
We're similar. We're like 70%. Right. And so
true for human beings.
I think even some plants are like, well, celery's probably 100% water. But, this idea of the moon is gravitationally pulling water upwards.
I see. Okay.
And then that's during a waxing moon, and then a waning moon. Then things are drawn back down into the earth. Okay. And so that's good for root crops, that latter thing. And then the former, the rising tide in the dirt is good for our above ground crops, or things that bud outside of the fruit.
I see. Okay.
So there's some general rules about it, but there's also things about, planting after a moon, because there might be less risk of that last frost. So there's lots of other more nuanced things about the moon, but the general rule is about moisture.
So let me ask you this. Let's say it's a full moon tonight. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow, what would you suggest planting? Would then be the root plants the day? Okay. And
great to transplant, right?
Okay.
You want to get all of that energy. So you want the momentum to be drawing down into the earth to get those roots set, and to have them really growing strongly into the ground. So great time for transplanting. Whereas a new seed, if you're sowing a direct seed, you're really wanting that to come out of the ground. So you want to do that in a waxing moon phase. So after the new moon to the full moon, we want to put things in the ground that we're really wanting to come up, where the foliage is important to the plant.
So how much about your work is it being a writer, editor versus being a gardener?
It's funny. Like I'm one of the few gardeners on staff. I've gardened for a long, long time. So I think it's really important, because I'm talking to people all the time about these subjects. But I think, most of my job is assigning out stories, editing those stories, writing those stories.
Right.
But yet I wouldn't have a grasp on them without a knowledge of gardening and growing. Yeah. So I think it's incredibly helpful. And the staff is very knowledgeable, while, and they all have yards and things, but I'm not saying they're not rabid like me. But of course, when you have kids, it's hard, and a lot of competing interests. It has to become your thing.
It does. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because, here we are at the first full day of spring. Yesterday was the spring equinox, and growing and gardening season will be quickly upon us. Depending on where you are in the country and the world. And so we're getting a garden together. We have a house from 1750, and we spent a lot of years. We've been there 7 years now. Most of the time we've spent renovating, restoring, weeding, and now it's finally like, okay, we have we had a very big plot, and it was too big of a plot, and so it became overwhelming. So I planted some grass around the area. It was just a giant plot. So now we have a more manageable size, very good soil. What would you recommend? First of all, we've got to do the deer fencing. So we know that's kind of like, unfortunately, number one. Beyond that, what would you recommend? What are the easy vegetables? What are your go-to tips and tricks for novice, first-time, beginner gardeners, so they get off on the right foot and want to do it and want to continue? I want to get some early wins, essentially.
Sure. Well, the first thing you said that excited me was that that you have good soil.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think, when we think about weather extremes that we are seeing now, there's a lot more attention to soil, because good soil is how you're going to weather any kind of a drought.
That's true.
Or even, torrential, when we get those really crazy rainstorms, erosion is far less if your soil is good. Yeah. So you're already on the right foot. I first of all think tomatoes. You got to have tomatoes if they're in your climate, because they don't taste the same. They taste incredible out of your own yard. So,
yes.
And I actually tend to buy starts for those. I don't typically start those from seed, because I'm looking for as many varieties as possible. So overall, I would say this for success. First of all, heirloom varieties of anything you like are great, because they tend to be more disease resistant.
Really?
And I like to say, I don't put in all the same variety. Like if I have starting from seed, I start a lot from seed, but I might only start, a couple dozen plants, and I might give some of those away and put some in my garden. I think variety is what you want, even within squashes, say, you want to have a few different kinds. And that sort of breeds success, because if one thing fails,
True, yes,
another
yeah.
won't. So, you've got kids. So to me, some of the things are like that kids like to eat cucumbers if they like cucumbers.
Yes, they definitely love cucumbers.
Radishes. And those are early, and everybody likes to shell a pea. So right now, those are the things I'd be thinking of because they're quick growers, especially radish and peas.
Yeah, I like that idea. Beans
are super easy because they fix nitrogen. You could put bean in bad soil and it will probably still do fine.
Okay.
I love squashes because they're great to give to people. Typically people, unless you're really foisting too many zucchini on them. But it's kind of like you can do a lot of plants so that you can have success. And if you have extra, it's great to have bounty.
Yes,
so those are some of my favorites. But again, like with kids, I think it's like so magical. Like I would put a bunch of pumpkins in because in the fall,
we're definitely going to do that.
Picking your own
believe
pumpkin.
me, we tried that and the deer got to it. And then we've got issues with bear now. So I mean,
you gotta need a good fence.
Yeah, literally just this morning, our trash can was tipped over.
Do you have a dog?
No, but the neighbor the night before sent us a photo of a bear that had crossed into his yard, so it clearly had come from mine. Mm-hmm. And the raccoons get in, but we have these little clips on our garbage, so they don't bother anymore. Raccoons are not strong enough to tip over a garbage can, but we have the bear. So that's critters and creatures is a thing, and there are a lot more invasive species it seems these days.
So much more. We're just putting together several stories on that.
Yeah,
and I keep eyeing this Japanese knotwood in my neighborhood, and I don't like it. Someone's let it go really all over their yard, and it's crawling everywhere. And it's hard to get rid of these invasives. Yeah. So keeping an eye for those is really key. I would also say, I don't know how your yard is, but if you're starting out, it's also nice to do something that you'll get in a few years. Like, I don't know if you can grow asparagus or can you throw a blueberry bush in?
Yes, we do have blueberry. Yeah, so we have a blueberry bush.
And you could add one a year. Yeah. And you could do different blooming times so that you might have blueberries for more like a month.
Okay.
The property that I purchased when I moved home is actually a permaculture orchard. It's fascinating.
Wow.
Which are things that I normally hadn't grown, but they did a whole entire kind of privet of raspberries that bloomed from July to November. So
really?
I had berries forever.
Wow, and berries aren't cheap. So what is a permaculture orchard?
So permaculture is intended to be a self-sustaining landscape, and also one that isn't entirely dependent on the human making all of the things happen all of the time once you properly install it. So what does that mean? So that means that a lot of fruit-bearing trees have been put in with really robust sort of wood chip cover on them so that they're continually feeding and creating their own fungal system that, feeds the tree.
Oh, wow.
So it's really thinking about the space as a system. So, how are things working together? How can I sustain the landscape with the least amount of intervention?
Right.
And that's really the idea of permaculture, but also it's much bigger. Of course, it's like giving back. It's like planting enough to give to others.
Wow.
There's it's beyond sustainability.
Yeah.
And so the people that put in the orchard where I'm at, they started 12 or 13 years ago.
Wow.
And what's wonderful is that they want to come up and harvest. So they've taught me a ton about trees that I didn't know about, like pawpaw or sour cherry or gooseberry, like many things that I had not really experienced. And so it's fascinating. But there's work to do. But it's this idea that once you install it, it really can be a food-producing place.
It sounds like Shangri-La. I'm sure it takes a lot of work in the initial stages, and it sounds like the catch is patience.
It is, but I think also that's the idea. Like I said, throwing in a shrub or two every year, it really builds over time, and so taking care to loving our annual vegetable gardens, but thinking, well, I could put a few things in that will be perennial producers like asparagus or blueberries or other things, and also sustaining, when you talk about pests, that's one nice thing about trees, right? Birds are my pests where I live right now.
Yeah.
They'll come in and get a lot of those berries off the trees, but there's plenty.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. You leave enough for everybody, purse included, and they won't
Yeah.
take. And then they'll also, hopefully, I don't know, eat some of the ticks or
Exactly.
some
Please.
of the bad things. So, I had a guest on the show who really was into possums and was talking about all the ticks that possums eat. So, my wife does not love possums, but we have a few in our yard, and particularly where we are in Connecticut, there are a lot of ticks. So, we've been very fortunate to not have very many ticks. But if it comes with a animal with a not so with a bit of a slimy tail and green eyes in the evening, well, it's a trade-off worth having, I think.
Yeah.
I think so.
Chickens are also really good at eating ticks. So if you ever wanted a little flock.
I guess that makes sense. Yeah, they love pecking at the ground. So.
They do. They eat them. I love chickens for that.
And so what trends have you seen in gardening, and where do you see things going, I don't know, now in the next 10 years or so?
Ooh, 10 years. I think we're talking about really drought and rainfall resistant plants and varieties, depending on where you are.
Right.
Really diversifying what we grow. Again, that attention to the soil. Canada just, labeled it like the year of soil, saying it's a foundation of everything, right?
Sure is, yeah.
And so I think those things are going to continue. One of the exciting things that we see is that this real love and grabbing onto container gardening and small space gardening.
Okay.
So what I love about that is it makes it accessible to people. So it's not just, buying a container or some pots for your patio. There's varieties that are compact shrub-like. Like you could get a compact cucumber plant for a pot.
That's very cool.
Tomatoes, of course, cherry tomatoes have long been grown, but even looking for new varieties that are even more bushy, growing up, trellised vegetables and fruits.
Right.
Again, small space.
Okay.
I think about people who have mobility issues.
Sure.
This puts it right where they can be, experiencing not just the joy of gardening. We know it's basically so good for you, right?
Yeah.
Gardeners live longer. The study that fascinates me lately is that it's really the soil. So there's this mycobacterium, it's VACCAE, I believe is the spelling. I think it's vaccae. And it's inert, but when it comes into our lungs, it promotes well-being. Wow. It lowers our cortisol. Yeah, and like just the simple act of watering is very calming and soothing.
It really is. I love doing it in the evenings, and when I can. Usually that's when we're putting our children to bed. But in the summer at like 7:00 and the sun is setting, you're just sitting out there. It is very calming. It really is. But it is. It's just playing in the dirt. They say playing in the dirt is good for you, and maybe it is that what you had just suggested, whatever that microbe is that your hands are touching, that you're inhaling in a way. And it's better than all the fumes and carbon monoxide from cars and pesticides and all that. And I guess speaking of pests, what are the trends there? What do you advocate as the Old Farmer's Almanac in terms of pesticides versus organic?
Yeah, we don't like pesticides. There are some herbicides. And again, if you're talking about invasive, sometimes there's no other way.
Yeah.
Or it's used in combination with cutting.
Yeah.
Taking plastic and putting it over things works, but that can take a couple of years.
Yeah.
So for us, we talk a lot more about the old ways. Companion planting, marigolds are like fantastic. They keep a lot of bug critters that you don't want away, but it's much more integrated. So you might, off the top of my head, I'm trying to think, like you might have plants that attract bugs away from your other plants. They might really like mint or something, and that's fine with you if they get to that or whatever that is. So a big one is that. The other one is, everyone knows about the decrease in pollinators.
Yes.
So we see many more people planting for pollinators. So, I might have my vegetable garden, but I'm going to have a whole bunch of bee balm, butterfly bush, and I'm going to do it so that I have seasons of it. So I don't just have pollinators in the summer, but I've got stuff for my pollinators spring, summer, winter, fall, and winter. We're people want to know leave those grasses up, leave those seed heads up. That's where they go in the winter.
Gotcha.
Don't rake all your leaves. There's little good things under there,
yeah.
and that's their habitat. So much more interest in the knowledge about that.
Okay.
I think there's been such a focus on hybridizing for different reasons, flowers, especially color and maybe fragrance. But we really see a return to some of the older varieties, even in ornamentals and shrubbery. The people are kind of gravitating back toward the old lilac or the, that classic rhododendron or a mock orange or a viburnum, and finding that sometimes things like fragrance and disease resistance were hybridized out of them, so that we see this desire to go back to those original cultivars.
And you feel like this desire to go back, I feel like now, particularly on social media, first of all, organic farming, organic everything has exploded in the last 15 or 20 years. And I feel like this is the epitome. This is the time for the old farmers. Maybe 1985, probably not. That was like the low point, and everybody, it was just a different era. But I mean, today you have everybody so interested in organics, and then of course you have the trad wife phenomenon on social media. Have you seen an increase in interest in all things gardening?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Homesteaders.
Yes.
The big homesteading movement.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, we're really seeing that, and it's great for us, that people want. But again, I think there's a younger generation that we're talking about here, and so they're hungry for the old information, and yet they also want the new. They really want to know how to do things right, but incorporate, what's the latest. But again, that combination, I think, is what we see in those groups. But you're right. I mean, it's a resurgence. I think that there's also attention to just the cost of food and the quality of food. Yeah. So maybe, people are feeling their budgets are tightening, and instead of choosing cheaper foods, they might go with growing some of their own, and give that a shot.
Fair enough. Yeah, makes sense.
We see a lot of people wanting to start a garden.
Yeah. I mean, and there's also just the satisfaction. Yeah, you can go to a grocery store and pretty much pick up anything you want. But, I mean, to eat something that you've grown from nothing to something, that's a lot more satisfying in so many respects, no matter what you're doing in life. So I think that has got to be a part of why there's so many different reasons that gardeners live longer, but obviously they're eating better food, but also there is a sense of satisfaction, a sense of purpose behind it.
I agree. And I think, they want to share that with others too. Feeding your family is also a source of pride.
Yeah, very much so.
If you can get the kids to eat it.
So let's talk tools.
Okay.
There are a lot of gardening tools, and I stopped getting the A.M. Leonard catalog because it was just 250 pages of too much stuff and too enticing. But I mean, what are the classics? What's the kit that people really need? Because I think folks can get overwhelmed. There's just so much choice. There's so much stuff out there. What are the basics?
I know. I'm a minimalist. And of course, we have a store. We have an almanac.com store.
Okay. All
so
right.
You can find our favorites there. I think it comes down to the basics. Like, you need a great pair of clippers. I always say to people, spend the money on that. If you've never worked with a great pair of clippers that's comfortable in your hand, that is sharp, that is a key one.
Yeah.
If you're cutting things or pruning things, it's just even when you're harvesting, a pair of clippers is going to help you damage your plants least if you're taking some of those ripe ones and leaving the rest.
Yes.
So I start there.
And sharpening is so key.
And keeping them clean, at the end of the season, really, because disease can transfer on your tools.
Whoa.
So, but shovel, hoe, these are your basics, right? A wheelbarrow. I don't use much more. I use some netting. Mm-hmm. I think we all need deterrents. Like I said, I have this kind of, I have a kite that keeps away the birds that the former people left me, and it's really fun. So I think it's sometimes site specific too, what you need.
Right. Yeah.
But those just basics. Yeah. I think you can get away with a trowel, of course, to dig. But so many people are no-till now, so you don't need a tiller.
Okay.
I think many people have understood that. Even if you don't have good soil, you might just want to cover that over with cardboard and put all new soil on top. And by the time that all kind of decomposes. You know, you've done a good job feeding that soil. So I think, you know, there's less focus on the big tools and, you know, hand tools. Good hand tools are what you need.
And maybe tell us about the cardboard, because I saw that in the Vegetable Gardener's Handbook. It talks about the cardboard. So tell us the significance of that, like what it's used for.
Well, so if you've never had a garden, and you know, again, we always see people wanting to start or like add space. So you can simply put cardboard, clean cardboard, which we all seem to have a lot of it.
These days, too much of it.
Exactly. You put that just down on the ground, and you can add your soil on top of it.
Right.
So you're going to plant on top of that. So it's almost like a raised bed,
but
you don't really have, you know, it comes up off the ground 6-12 inches, whatever you're adding there. Yeah. But because it decomposes fine over time, it takes it a while. You're not worried about that grass coming through as a weed for a while. And by the time it does, you'll be good.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a favorite. And you could just use newsprint, I suppose, too. Right. I think cardboard's clean and it's thick enough that you're really going to deter.
And I guess it doesn't have any bleaching in it because it's usually brown. I mean, most cardboard, I mean, I guess there is some white cardboard, but maybe that's part of it. And I wanted to get back to the wheelbarrow because you did say something. I do know a lot about wheelbarrows, and my one tip for listeners is get the flat-free wheelbarrow wheel.
Yes.
You will save yourself a lot of trouble. A lot. I have two wheelbarrows. I do a lot of stone wall work, so I have a metal wheelbarrow, and then I have a plastic one for dirt and such. And
exactly, a nice
both
light
have
one.
Flat, free wheelbarrow wheels because that's the last thing you want to do. And
take that wheel off and have to go to the gas station, pump it up, or get a new inner tube.
And they cost more in the beginning, but you'll save yourself a headache. So
good tip.
I'm Mr. Anti-Headache. So maybe we could turn to some anecdotes and pleasantries. And I mean, that's part of what the Almanac is famous for. And I was talking to somebody earlier, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I keep it in my bathroom all year long." And you know, I guess this person wasn't necessarily a gardener, but an Almanac reader. So I mean, where do you find all that stuff? How do you source that stuff?
That's a year-long project.
Definitely.
You know, and our editor, so our former managing editor, Jack Burnett, did it for years. And then our new, well, she's been here 20 years, so she's not new, but Sarah, who also does our kids, she's our A&P person. We call it A&P. So she collects things. She's got an incredible sense of humor. But we all send things. When you find something odd, you just know, right? You know. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's like social media, but we do so much research here, you know, and we're researching many different sources. And so in those ways, we come up with things all the time like, hey, did you know, or a news item or something like that. But we do have people that on staff that, you know, we send them to Sarah, but she's really sussing them out. And it's peculiar because, you know, we want it to be good humor. We're sort of apolitical,
right?
You know, we're family friendly,
right.
Yet, you know, at the same time, we've got a lot of clever readers.
Yeah.
So they also send us things.
Yes.
That's what's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. And I've seen, I mean, you mentioned earlier you had a survey, but you also have recipe so there is a lot of community building.
Oh, that's the secret to the Almanac. We didn't talk about the secret sauce, which is that we hear from our readers all the time.
That's great.
You know, here's some mail. Every editor is constantly answering questions on almanac.com, or we have reader questions that just come into us over this thing called Zendesk about anything, you know, and so we can really, then you can look at also reviews, you know, on Amazon or wherever, you know, they have reviews where we sell. So those are so informative, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do I love about the Almanac? What don't I like? What is someone perplexed by? People love to tell us when we don't get the weather right in their area.
Well, I mean, yeah, and that's every weatherman and woman in the world.
Exactly. But I always love the chance to engage because, you know, there's something else there. They're really wanting to plant, you know? And so I think that's just a gift of the Almanac that, yes, we have readers' essay contests. We had about 450 entries this year.
Wow.
The greatest gift you ever gave, that'll be in the 2026.
Ah, okay.
So that's a lot of fun. And then the reader recipes. You just missed it. You should have been here last week. We had our recipe testing. It was all tomato recipes. And then we Sarah is actually our editor for Sarah Peralt. So she will go through, she had hundreds, pick out what she knows are like definitely 15 that are going to work for a home cook that are interesting.
Sure.
And then everyone on staff grabs one or two. We test
And they
them.
make them.
We bring them in here. We have a whole meal set out, not a meal, but we all try everything, and then we vote.
Yeah. Okay.
So I won't tell you the winner, but I happen to have that recipe this year. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I've considered entering some contests at some of these, county and state fairs. I pickle a lot of things. But some of these county and state fairs, they do it by looks alone, which is blasphemy to me.
It really is. It's the flavor.
I'm like, what's the point? So
Right.
I mean, you could just pump it full of chemicals. I don't know.
Yeah.
Green number 4 and yellow number 5, and like, oh wow, it looks so bright and shiny. It must be tasty. So
No, we really eat the stuff, and we make sure you can cook it too.
okay,
We don't.
Yeah.
That's what we want. We want that reader to be able to say like, oh, yeah, I want to make that.
Yeah. So let's talk some controversies.
Okay.
The whole.
I know.
So I got mine, and I know at one point like $40,000 it cost.
Oh, it's
to do
probably
the
more
whole.
now.
And so as you can see, you may see by the lack of the hole, I bought it from a large online retailer.
Yes.
And so there was no hole.
Yes.
I usually buy it from the local
Hardware
bookstore.
store, yeah.
So tell us about that.
So the Almanac has many editions.
Right,
So the classic is with the hole.
Right.
And my nephew, who has a little horse farm in Kentucky, he loves to send me a picture of his. He puts it in his barn on a nail.
Right.
You
Right.
know, or, in your bathroom. We love to be in people's bathrooms. So that's a really popular one. But sometimes people want a little brighter, a little easier to read. That's the one that you have. And it also has a real nice thick reference section.
It does.
And so that's a robust thing. And we've been really working on changing that up year to year. Not the whole thing, but doing new things.
The special bookstore supplement.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. I mean, it's got the reference compendium of phases of the moon to the Chinese zodiac sign.
Things you're not going to just pop in on your browser and be able to get, right?
Yeah.
So then we also, this will floor you, we do 100,000 hardcovers, and people subscribe for those.
Wow.
So out of our 2.5 million whatever, copies, which we have many types. So, well, not many. So one is hardcover, one is classic, one is the bookstore.
Yeah.
We also have a trade version, which is a lot like the one you have.
Okay.
This year, we did a large print.
Oh, wow. Look at that. Okay.
Which is tabloid, I guess, size, so an 8.5 by 11 or a little bit bigger.
Right.
And we hadn't done that for 25 years. And so we kept seeing, again, our readers tell us, kept writing in, do you have one? Granny really wants it, and so now with the advent of much more print on demand, we were able to say, okay, we'll do a few thousand copies and then, print on demand. Hotcakes.
Really?
Oh, we sold thousands and thousands of them.
Wow.
So, the market changed in those years in terms of, we knew that people wanted it, but it made it so it could be affordable.
Yeah.
So an advent in technology.
Yes.
And honestly, we love that one for doing interviews when people are really looking for information. It's easier to find. So the staff enjoys it.
Right.
We're like, yay, 2025.
So, I mean, you sell 2.5 million copies a year.
Yes.
So, I mean, you're pumping out a bestseller every single year, year after year.
We love that. We in the Boston, because we're close to Boston, that I think we were 5 or 6 weeks or more this year on the bestseller. It's an Amy Tan's Bird book kept trying to get us out of the spot because it's nonfiction, but my boss Shereen would come in like, no, we're still there. So, we're once a year, but we love that time in the limelight. We really do.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. I mean, it is. It's like a Michael Jackson album. Every year you're selling. Right. Every year. I mean, that's incredible. So you are the Old Farmer's Almanac. I had no idea that there was also a Farmer's Almanac. Yep.
They don't sell. I don't know a ton about them. They're in Maine.
Right.
We are friendly with them because we often get each other's mail.
Fair enough.
We're like, no, this horrible review is for you. And they're like us. They have another business, really. Like for us, we sell a lot of calendars.
Yeah.
Our gardening calendar is going to be 50 years old in 2027. That's unheard of. It's an illustrated calendar.
Yeah.
But so they do promotional products. So this is kind of their other product that they do, and I think they do. I don't know if it's 300,000 or 500,000, but they tend to be more in New England, where we have all those other editions.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of a friendly warfare. It's not really. It's really only when the weather predictions come out,
right.
And they try to get ours out before us, and we're never going to try to chase them.
Yeah,
we're like, we're the Old Farmer's Almanac here. So,
have you ever thought of having like a friendly softball match against their editorial staff?
We should.
Because they're in Lewiston, Maine, which is not that far, and I looked it up. Portsmouth, New Hampshire is about halfway.
Yeah.
Bragging rights. You guys get like a huge statue that the winner gets every
Almanac
year.
Oh, softball off.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you get some local ringers on the team. It's like, this is the delivery guy. I don't know. Just a thought.
It's a good thought. It's a good thought.
So you mentioned that you have various editions. Tell me about that.
So, like I said, they're really all a little bit different. People who love the whole, they want the classic.
Right.
The Canadian edition.
Right, so there's regional editions.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, we used to do regional, but now we just do U.S. and Canada.
Oh, U.S. and Canada.
Yeah,
okay.
and so they come in formats, I guess I would say.
Okay.
But the Canadian is different. It has some of the same feature stories, but all the weather is fixed for Canada, all the tides, any of that information, frost dates.
Yeah.
Several of the stories will be just for Canada. The Quebec weather's in French. And so, it's pretty particular, though. I always hear from Canadians who say, it's really not Canadian enough. And, luckily I have Canadian roots myself. So I'm like, well, okay, we'll do better. It's for me too. So, but of course, they're a close neighbor to us.
Yeah,
and so,
we're here not too far from Canada. I mean, we're in New Hampshire, so.
And we print in Canada.
Okay.
We buy all our newsprint in Canada, though we'll see how that changes. But we had already moved to also printing and distributing in Canada the Canadian edition, so that those dollars are going to Canadian people.
Right.
So that's been happening for a long time.
Yeah.
And another kind of cool thing you just made me think of, which has nothing to do with what you just asked, is that here in Dublin, we are 100% solar powered.
Wow.
Right down the hill, we have a field that we own, and that is just filled with panels.
Wow.
And that's how we operate around here.
And Old Farmer's Almanac is owned by Yankee
Publishing.
And can you talk about some of their output as well?
Sure. Yankee Publishing purchased the Almanac in the 30s. Okay. So it already had started Yankee Magazine, our founder of Yankee Publishing, Rob Sagendorf. And then the Almanac, as the story goes, was kind of on life support. And they were sort of like, yeah, you could take that,
Right.
But Rob really loved the Almanac and felt it needed to continue. And so that ended up being a much bigger, publication over time.
Right.
Yankee's a regional magazine. I used to work there.
Okay.
It's fantastic. It's been around for decades. I want to say it might be going on its 90th year.
Wow. I mean, it's one of the great regional publications in the country.
It really is. And New England is so evocative, Yeah. But we also have a really cool magazine based in Ohio. It's a small staff. It's called Family Tree.
Okay.
And it's just incredible genealogy magazine.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Anybody, like my cousin Jimmy, is our family genealogist, and he loves it.
Wow.
I mean, it's just for those people that, using the databases and finding those ship manifests, on microfiche and, how to do that.
Yeah.
And then in New Hampshire, in Manchester, New Hampshire, we have the New Hampshire group, and they do New Hampshire publications. So there's a New Hampshire magazine, I think there's a New Hampshire home, and they do some other special interest pubs that are real, like, local to New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And that's the body of Yankee Publishing.
Wow. All right. Well, that's and so the Old Farmer's Almanac is still the best seller.
Yes.
Out of all of them.
We sell, like, probably more gardening calendars than all of those other publications put together.
Wow.
Just because the scale
Wow.
is so much bigger, you know?
Yeah. And you're talking about the editorial staff, but you also have advertising staff. And I just have to say, one of the pleasures for me about reading the Almanac are the advertisements. I mean, they're just, you don't see them obviously watching CBS News. You know, it's like,
Right? The miracle cures, you mean? Or the psychics?
Yeah. Chicken soup for the soil. What is it? Chicken soup for the soil. Or the all-wool mop I saw. I'm like, I don't need a mop, but you know what? I want to buy an all-wool mop. It just...
Bestseller.
Is it really?
Yeah, never heard a complaint about that. Definitely hear complaints about the ads sometimes. And or people don't maybe like the astrology. And I'll often say, well, it is in the same publication that we have miracle cures and psychics, and so we ask you to use your own judgment.
Yes, yeah.
And that's really, to me, like you, I just think that's part of the Almanac.
Yeah.
Wacky ads have been with us since day one.
Right.
Because the Almanac was about 2 cents, and it was peddled by somebody selling tomato pills with not nary a tomato in them. And so this idea that it's just kind of a marketplace of things, and I think that most people get it, but I often hear, I'd say I hear a complaint every month or two about like, well, and I just like, well, yeah, but that's part of the flavor, right?
I think so. It really is. And
Yeah.
again, I'm not much for advertising, but these are pretty good.
They are.
And you have some strange holidays in the Almanac.
We do.
Are they celebrated in the office here? Do you guys get days off on these?
King Kamehameha Day or Will Rogers Day? Do we celebrate them? We do. Well, we have page-a-day calendars, so you'll
yes.
find those. So,
yes.
We might, as a joke amongst us, find a holiday to mention to each other. Though I will say, as we know about when we're looking at our surveys, more women probably purchase the Almanac, not a whole lot more.
Interesting.
But I have said, since I've come here, I've asked if we could pay attention to maybe finding some more female-centric holidays.
Okay.
Because there's many women to celebrate.
Right.
And I think just for years, there wasn't. Those weren't official holidays. And many of them were, many that are officially recognized by states or the country, or are tend to be about historic men, right? Because that was the fact.
Yeah.
So it's been a little bit of work to try to add more of those and find those official ones.
Right.
But that's been something we've been working on.
And
they'll be quirky too.
One of my favorites is the months of the year, and you've got the farmer's calendar. And if I could just read just a few sentences.
Please do.
A fool's month for plowing. This is the month of April, which hath 30 days. The soil is a sop shop. This is the kind of thing that Gretchen says. She has hoed herself into the soggy center of her potato patch. She spins in the mud, slowed by her sodden galoshes. This is beautiful.
Yes. So David Bartone is a poet and a teacher and a farmer who writes for us.
Okay.
He just took this job on. He's a new essayist for us because when I came on board, I wanted to go back to the old ways. I wanted it to be entertaining. Yeah. I find that truly entertaining.
Yeah,
I find
really
that
is.
It's a prose poem.
It is.
It's so evocative of the month, and he's got 200 words to do it.
Yeah.
It takes him, all year. He's thinking about those seasons.
Yeah.
And so to me, those are, again, Robert B. Thomas was like, it's got to be useful with a pleasant degree of humor.
Yes.
And it needs to have some entertainment value if it's going to be around all year.
Yeah.
And to me, that, the farmer's essays, and also the doggerel that runs down, do you see us alongside it?
Yes.
The poems are by,
In a cloudy night sky, do I spy the space shuttle? No, it's fragments that fly from comet Swift Tuttle. Clear days chased away by a hazy hot muddle. Cut hay while the sun shines. No time to scuttle.
So that's Danny Clark. He's our doggerel writer, and his late dad did it for 40 years.
Wow.
And so Dan, big shoes to fill, and he has stepped in incredible ways. So those are just, to me, the joy.
Yeah.
That to me is the entertaining part.
Well, being the 14th editor, those are pretty big shoes to fill, and I hope you're around for 50 years, as long as Robert B. Thomas.
Right? Who knows with the miracle? I might take one of those miracle cures.
Well, I think gardening is one of them. So. Well, how can people find out more about the Almanac and all your publications?
Almanac.com is the best place to go. In fact, tons of free stuff on there. Plant profiles, all of our frost and planting dates. You can just punch in your zip code and find out a 60-day, our long range, just 60-day. We make you buy the almanac for the rest. But you can find out, again, like specific frost, early frost and late frost times for your zip code, all based on, great data. And so those are really robust tools online. But that's the best place. And we have a store there, and you can buy any of our editions and our calendars and books.
All right. So including the one with the hole in the corner and the large print edition. And the page-a-day calendar. All at almanac.com.
Yes.
Which is, that says you're the OG, that you own the www.almanac.com.
Right.
That's pretty cool. Well, Carol, it's been a pleasure, and great having you on All Across America.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right. We did it. All right.